There's an expression, I'm sure you've heard this. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. This is true of so many online services. You get them for free. In exchange, you're giving up your data. Often that data is used to do targeted advertising towards you. And in the new era of consent screens, some websites, mostly news sites, are exploring other options. If you don't want to consent to being cookied and tracked, how about, as an alternative, paying something? It's a new and perhaps growing idea. We don't know yet.
My name is Victor Morel. I used to be a postdoc at VU in Vienna in Austria, and now I'm a postdoc at Chalmers in Sweden, in Göteborg. I used to work on a standard for consent in the IoT. Following the release of ADPC, which was an alternative to cookie banners on the web, I worked on ADPC IoT, which basically took the idea of this consent, this standard for the web, and apply it to the specificities of the IoT. This is what I did when I was in Austria. And now I will continue working on the IoT, on consent management issues, but more from a usable privacy point of view. We would like to study human, what are their preferences and expectations when it comes to privacy in Internet of Things.
That's interesting. I don't know a lot about that area. I am comfortable asking for consent when I go to a website. I don't want to give consent to my toothbrush. Is there a vision for what this all looks like in the future?
Yes, actually, we are specifically working on this new kind of application. It's called the Trigger Action application. For instance, there's this IFTTT. It's an ecosystem of services. A device can trigger an action that will then, for instance, send an email, or perhaps a smart bulb may detect the luminosity in your home and regulate it accordingly. So this is all of these trigger action that are about. And we'd like to know how comfortable people are with this and eventually use all their preferences and expectation to extract what we call privacy profiles from it to like provide a kind of turnkey solution so that you won't have to tweak every parameters when it comes to your privacy management on IoT.
Nice. Yeah, I would love for my environment to learn me instead of the other way around.
Exactly.
On a related topic, the main paper I invited you on to discuss today is titled Your Consent is Worth 75 Euros a Year Measurement and Lawfulness of Cookie Paywalls. So, maybe a good place to start would be with some definitions. I think everybody knows what a cookie paywall is, but is there any specificity we should make sure we touch on? What is a cookie paywall?
Well, actually, a cookie paywall is a kind of a new practice on the web because we were used to paywalls where you have to pay a fee, otherwise you can't access a website, or a cookie wall, which basically tracks you and you don't have that much of a choice. And this novelty is that the cookie paywall combines the two approaches and provides you with the choice: either you're being tracked by all trackers, all cookies, or you can pay a fee. And this is this novelty that we're trying to analyze in this paper.
So, I don't necessarily encounter that a lot myself. I do get a lot of cookies that say accept, or I guess the other option is go away. I've never really messed around with clicking deny, but I've never seen like a third button that says pay 25 cents and we won't track you. Is that on the horizon? Will I start seeing that?
We started this project as a student project at the University of VU in Vienna because this is getting quite popular in Austria and in Germany. So we were just browsing some website, and wow, this website, actually this news website like Der Standard, for instance, is actually preventing me from accessing the website except if I pay this fee. As a French person, I also found some website, well, not only news website actually. It seems to be mostly in Europe for now, but maybe it will come in the US later on.
Do you have any sense of the amount of adoption, the volume of sites that have picked up this opportunity?
We only found out 13 websites using specifically these cookie paywalls. So it doesn't seem to be a much adopted practice so far, but we only conducted this analysis on a few thousand websites, which is basically peanuts compared to what we could actually do on a large scale.
Could you talk a little bit about some of the metadata you were able to gather at those sites?
So we ran a manual annotation of the website because we wanted to study the behavior in the wild of these practices. We recorded the price, for instance, the type of paywall, yeah, and also the type of website. For instance, if it was like a news website, a lifestyle website, etc. We also investigated some other metadata, for instance, the position of the wall on the screen, but we didn't have any interesting result in that respect. So we did not really put the spotlight on this finding in the paper.
And were these like a subscription model or was it a transactional event?
It was mostly a subscription model, monthly, but also weekly. And we provided like an average price per year so that we could actually present something, yeah, average. But it was mostly subscription based, indeed.
And could you give a range on the price? What's the approximate cost of one of these subscriptions?
The most expensive was 75 euros a year. The lowest, I think, was like 36 euros only. I don't know how it amounts in dollars. So it's not necessarily that much, let's say, compared to the actual price you would have to pay if you subscribe to some newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion of that is that it's not a trivial amount, but it's a very accessible amount most people could find that they could pay if they wanted to.
Mhm. Yes, but we're not so sure actually that people actually pay this fee as low as it can seem. A study from 2020 from the Technology Policy Institute found that most people would actually trade almost any aspect of their online privacy for less than $10. So I don't know if like for 75 euros, maybe you will think it twice.
Well, for those who do pay, what are they paying for? Is it ad free, tracking free, all of the above?
Yeah, that's actually the claim, at least from this cookie paywall, is that if you pay, you're not tracked. But we're not so sure. I mean, we didn't have any funding to test all of the website and actually pay the fee and see whether we won't be tracked or not. So we are not exactly sure. But it seems that at least superficially, websites are not tracking you if you pay. But I mean, this is to be taken with a pinch of salt because some other large scale studies conducted on more generally cookie banners found out that the framework used to implement these cookie practices, the TCF, the Transparency and Consent Framework, is not necessarily respected. So what we would like to do is to run an analysis on like a very big scale and see that indeed people are not tracked online.
So it seems like that might be a bit of a black box. If I decide to track people and violate that rule in the back end on my own private server, you don't necessarily have visibility into that. How can you study it?
This is indeed really hard to study because there is not that much that happens on the client side, as we say. Most of it happens in the back. This kind of practice is also known as real time bidding. So basically, as soon as your consent is out, everything happens out in the open. And we, as researchers, as auditors, as data protection agencies, can't really know nor investigate except if we get the right to audit these systems, which is also quite complicated technically, and I mean from an administrative point of view.
And I don't know how you could get any details on this, but do you have any indication of the popularity or growth of these? How many people are selecting that as an option?
No, this is also something that we would like to investigate. We presume that it may just be another type of dark pattern, like something that induce you into just consenting, but not really in a freely manner. One of our hypotheses is that people just click on yes, I accept, and to being tracked by all these cookies.
Yeah, I think that's a common. It'd be very surprising to me if people actually read these long terms of service that are there. I think it's just click accept and move along.
No, yeah, except if you're already a subscriber, you may not want to pay because you have to input your credit card information, all of this data. Whereas if you just click on yes, I accept, then you can browse the website and for free at least.
Well, tell me a little bit more about this study. I know you got a big data set gathered by crawling and checking these different sites. What kind of analyses can you do once gathered?
So we first build a list of like the top websites in Central Europe countries, and then some manual annotators went and browsed all of this website by hand to see whether they were presenting a paywall or a cookie paywall. I mean, when we started the study, we didn't know whereas we would find some new kind of paywall. We were just looking for like regular paywalls actually. And we observed that some of them were like presenting this choice between like a cookie or paying a fee. So that was also part of the job, like this making this distinction with this new kind of practices, this new trend. An interesting finding is that, according to the annotators, some websites were not presenting the same interface. Some were presenting a hard paywall, and others like a soft paywall. We guess also that some were presenting cookie paywalls, and others some just regular paywalls. And we don't really know why. We have an idea of the how. I think it's called personalized pricing. It's basically the idea that you would present a different product according to like some tailored features. Whereas if you're browsing with Firefox or if you're browsing with a Chrome, for instance, you won't have the same presentation. And this is also something that we would like to know how.
So as a consumer, I kind of don't like this idea. It's thanks to our sponsor Neptune.ai. 99% of machine learning teams are doing awesome things at a reasonable scale with 4 people and 2 production models. But most of the industry best practices come from a handful of companies operating models at hyperscale. The folks over at Neptune.ai want to change that by sharing insights, tool stacks, and real-life stories from practitioners doing machine learning and ML ops at a reasonable scale. They even built a flexible tool for experiment tracking and model registry that will fit with your workflow at no scale, reasonable scale, and beyond. Check them out at Neptune.ai. So as a consumer, I kind of don't like this idea. It's a little offensive to me that if I happen to, I don't know, shop for something when I'm in a expensive home price neighborhood, because that's where I am on my mobile phone, that the prices would be higher than in a lower income neighborhood. It sort of seems off. Is that the sort of type of targeting we're getting into?
Yes, definitely. I think it's a known fact that some Mac users have been presented some different products because they're notoriously more wealthy than non-Mac users. And it may well be the case also for these paywalls, that you're not presented the same thing according to your potentially value on the data market.
I know you're not an attorney, but do you have a sense of the legalities of that? Is everything in that sort of targeting allowed?
This targeting maybe, but it's kind of hard to know. I mean, yeah, indeed, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a jurist. If they can do this kind of targeted, they're already collecting and processing personal data, as we call it in the EU. I think it's called personally identifiable information in the US. And so for that, at least in Europe, according to the GDPR, we need a legal ground. If you do it before asking for consent, well, the question is out in the open. How is it legal? I don't know. We're not so sure.
Yeah, time will tell, maybe.
Mm.
Is it reasonable to make the jump from the 75 euro subscription fee to saying that's the equivalent in what they would have earned in targeted advertising?
I think they're winning in both cases because 75 euros a year seem a lot to me for just my own personal data that I will provide if I browse this website. So I think is for them either they get like a very juicy price of 75 euros and wow, that's a lot, or they get all the personal data, but they don't have to do anything because all the process is automated.
But I guess what I'm asking is, do you think that that's, and without knowing their internal accounting, I guess you couldn't know, but
Hmm.
I could look at it 3 ways. Either that is the exact price of targeted advertising and they're just saying, pick one or the other, or maybe this is an upgrade for them. They'll have a better margin and they'll make more money, or maybe it's a loss leader and they could have made more money with the targeted advertising. I really am unconvinced which is correct. Do you have a sense?
I think it's more of a bonus for them
Hmm.
because yeah, I don't think your own personal data will amount to 75 euros even if you're tracked for a full year on the website. Maybe it would need to be combined to other databases, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they're definitely winning in all situations.
So let's say I sign up and I subscribe. That means you've got my home address because of the credit card, my name, my zip code, all these details. And as I visit that news site, they will quickly learn I like tech news, I like science news, I do not like celebrity gossip. How do they turn this into profit? What about these facts can they sell?
Basically, the idea is that they are collecting a lot of data to build advertising profiles that they would then sell. So the whole thing with the TCF, with the transparency and consent framework working in the background, is that it's really easy to sell all of this data to many advertisers. They're called vendors, according to the TCF jargon. So you say, okay, you can sell all of this data for this kind of purposes. If you consent to many different purposes and to many different vendors. So they all exchange this data and combine it on their own databases. And then that makes money, that makes value, actually.
Well, there have been a lot of steps. GDPR is maybe the most prominent one, but here in my state of California, we have the CCPA and many other acronyms that are now defining different rights and privacies for people. But it also makes it such that we have to kind of trust that a lot of these are enforced. I don't know that there's anything software enforceable that exists today where I can know for sure all the websites are following these policies and whatnot. It does take researchers like yourself to kind of do some auditing. How complete of an audit can you do without having something on the inside?
Without having something or someone on the inside, I think it's really hard to achieve. Because, well, on the one hand, we have the intellectual property, and we can't just go to a company and request the keys to all databases and
Right.
servers, etc. That makes it hard. But for instance, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, which is editing the transparency and consent framework, have been criticized recently by the Belgian DPA, the Data Protection Agency, BUC. They answer that they're okay to be audited to prove that actually the TCF was working as they said.
And what's the process for an audit like that? Is it taking some independent third party person to come in and look at things, or how will that proceed?
Yes, I haven't conducted such an audit myself, but I would presume that indeed you would have to, they would have to present how things work, and then you would have to interpret these results according to what is feasible, is the actually how it could work, etc. But the other possibility would maybe to make some cryptographic proof, for instance, to I may also work on another project with some students here at Chalmers, a VPN company who is trying to provide transparency to systems by issuing cryptographic signatures. So they say, okay, we are running this piece of code on our VPN server, and here is the mathematical proof. I think that's a much better solution, actually, because well, the proof is really sound in that case and verifiable.
As you went through the audit, did you find any obvious cases where someone had broken the framework or was in violation of some of these principles?
Not in our case, but I know that some previous work conducted on this transparency and consent framework proved that, yeah, the framework was not actually respected, and that many websites were claiming not to collect your consent, for instance, without you consenting to it. But it was not the case in practice. So on our just the few number of websites we found, we didn't find any violation of the framework indeed, which was always and systematically the same, the TCF. We didn't find any violation, but maybe if we found like 200 different websites using cookie paywalls and the TCF, these results would change.
What would it take to scale up and do a much broader survey?
Well, basically, students, because as academics, we don't have a lot of time to do research and write papers and teach, etc., etc. We also need other people helping us, and most of the time, it's master students. So, what I would like to do is to recruit some master students in my university so that they would build like a large-scale crawler and analyze whether tracking happens or not, if you consent or if you pay the fees, and like all of the future work we're opening in the last section of the paper.
Yeah, let's dig into some of that. Could you talk about the vision of what comes next?
Yeah, we found research avenues in three different tracks because legally speaking, we showed that the positions brought by the different data protection agencies in Europe are not exactly level. So there will be some case by case study to be conducted, legally speaking. Also, from a cognitive science point of view, would be interested in investigating whether users actually pay for this kind of subscription and what are the reasons that could motivate such a payment. And finally, I would like to investigate technically how these practices happen on a large scale and also verify whether tracking is actually prevented if you pay the fee. But yeah, that will require time, money, and yeah, a lot of research, of course.
We've touched on a lot of interesting ideas about what might come, anything from the cryptographic solutions to better audits. If we're thinking practically and you want to make a prediction 5 years out, what will the internet look like?
I don't know. I hope the cookie model, the cookie paywall model won't prevail, and that we'll have like a safer internet free of tracking and without having to pay like an exorbitant fee. I would really love that, but that's more a hope than a prediction. We are doing research, and I mean we can't really foresight what could happen. I don't know if we're taking the good edge on the web. Time will tell. We've been discussing cookies and tracking on the web, but I think if we don't address targeted advertising as a whole business practice, we will just have too much work as researchers on privacy. So yeah, maybe we should also like think a bit more about this whole idea of like tracking people and this surveillance capitalism, as Shoshana Zuboff, the Harvard professor, put it. And maybe we also need to step back a little bit on these practices and like think about the kind of internet we really want.
I like the vision there. I also know, though, that someone has to pay for all the servers. Where's the revenue going to come from?
Yeah, and I'm not an economics, but I think there is also some work to do from this discipline. Like, how do we provide a healthy business model from the internet, something that won't just be a race between like researchers and bad business practices to see how we could track people the best or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to wind up with a question that's a little bit of a pivot, but given how significant some of these topics are and what a rising concern privacy and protections are, could you talk a little bit about the academic path to get into it? Should I start as a computer scientist, or how does someone who wants to get into these areas get started?
Yeah, I think computer science is definitely a good way to go, a good path to proceed, but we also need people from interdisciplinary backgrounds and people working in different fields. So, for instance, in this paper, different authors coming from different disciplines, cognitive science, law, and me, I'm more a technical person working pure computer science. But I mean, we need to talk together, and that's also the thing. I mean, if we want to address this kind of like a complex issue, we need to have like different viewpoints on the topic.
And Victor, where can people follow you and your work online?
I'm not so active, but I think I will become more and more on Twitter as Victor Morel. I also have an up-to-date website on which you can find all of my publications in open access.
Sounds good. We'll have links to both in the show notes for listeners who want to follow up.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your work.
Well, thanks a lot, Kyle, for inviting me.
That's going to wrap it up for this week, but here's your preview of what I've got for you next time.
Back in 2015, it was around 1 in 4. But up to now, I think the most recent statistics from last year is that 50% of users in the age group from 16 to, I guess, 50 or 60, 1 in 2, they actually use at least some sort of ad blocking.
That's next time on Data Skeptic.